Here is theory number 2 in my series of videos relating to the Chris Watts murder case. These videos are just ideas and opinions and theories of what could have occurred the night Shanann, Bella, Cece and Nico was murdered. You have to remember, this particular video isn't what I 100% believe happened, and it's just like it says, a theory, on all the evidence, on all the contradictions and coincidences and everything we have in this case. So as you're watching it, keep an open mind and maybe it will spark an idea in your own head of what happened that night. So here it is, theory number 2. Nichol Kessinger, Chris Watts' mistress, despised everything about Shanann Watts. She'd got with a man that had everything. Great kids, a good house and job, and a wife that she was so jealous of. And during her relationship with Chris, she tried to point out the differences between her and Shanann, like the fact that Shanann would like the materialistic things in life, and tried to insist that she was nothing like this, and that she didn't need the car, the big house, and everything that comes with it. She was already planting the seed in Chris's head. Kessinger would frequently ask Chris if he'd spoken to his family, his mum and dad, enforcing the idea that Shanann had created a barrier and turmoil between him and his own parents. And Kessinger knew intimate details of Chris's and Shanann's financial situation. She made sure that she was aware of his income and what debt he had, strengthening the idea for Chris to believe that what he had with Shanann was a farce. Chris and Kessinger would frequently talk what their plans would be moving forward with their relationship, including looking for an apartment, and during these conversations, Kessinger was very keen on knowing if Shanann would be living close to Chris, already showing signs, before Chris had even split up with Shanann, that she was the jealous type. I believe early on in the relationship, Chris and Kessinger would discuss what life would be like if he didn't have children or a wife, trying to tease him over to the idea that he would be debt-free with no responsibilities and he could live the life he was sampling with Kessinger. And when Shanann and the kids went to stay with her parents for 5 weeks, Chris was supposed to be staying at home, but the thing is, he wasn't at home. He was constantly, every day, every night at Kessinger's apartment. She made sure that he had no reminders of what his actual family was, no pictures on the walls, no reminders of the things at home he'd bought with Shanann. Kessinger was isolating him from all these things like a predator, keeping him away so that she could poison his mind, and Chris was a willing victim. That Kessinger and Chris openly spoke, maybe in the beginning as a joke about getting rid of his family, fantasizing about a life without everything he used to hold dear. Because on the Saturday the 11th of August, he went to a restaurant called the Lazy Dog with Kessinger, and Chris to this day regrets, out of all the things he's ever said, this event of him going to the Lazy Dog is one of the biggest ones he wished he'd never done. So you have to ask yourself why this event of simply going to a restaurant with his mistress 2 days before his kids and wife was murdered, why this was so paramount to what happened 2 days later. Well, one of the theory is that him and Kessinger fine-tuned their idea and their plan to once and for all to rid him of his wife. And in this theory, I don't believe the original plan was for Chris and Kessinger to kill his kids. I believe the original plan was to kill Shanann, but something went wrong. So it brings us to Sunday, the 12th of August, the night before the murders. Chris and Kessinger were on the phone, finalising the finer details to their plan. In interviews after everything occurred, both Chris and Kessinger deny remembering what the conversation was about, but I believe they both definitely know exactly what they were talking about. Because you have to ask yourself, why deny knowledge of the conversation happening in the first place if there was nothing criminal being discussed? So Kessinger and Chris had their plan. They would wait until Shanann came home from a work trip. One idea is that Kessinger was waiting in the basement until Chris did what he thought he had to do, and she would help him clean up. And when Chris was arrested, he didn't have any defensive marks on him at all. So I believe Chris waited until Shanann fell asleep and choked her out from behind, either using his hands or his arm to put her in a chokehold and snuff the life from Shanann. But it is my theory that something went wrong. The kids heard the commotion in Chris and Shanann's bedroom, and either both or one of them came in and saw him doing what he was doing to Shanann. And Chris Watts now knew he could never have the life he wanted with Kessinger because there was now witnesses to him murdering his wife. It was Bella and Cece. And the only way out of this mess that he had created was that his kids could not be alive to testify against him as witnesses. Chris knew he wouldn't be able to kill his own children, but he had a partner in his devious plan. She was waiting downstairs in the basement ready. Kessinger and Chris knew that to get away with what they'd just done, they couldn't have any witnesses, including his children. So one of them would have to murder Bella and Cece. So it is my theory that Kessinger was the one that smothered Shanann and Chris's children. And when Chris said in an interview later on that he would never hurt his children, and he was adamant about this fact, I believe that to be true. But it was in fact Kessinger that did do it. So in the early hours of Monday morning, with the help of Kessinger, Chris prepared the bodies of his wife and kids and put them in his truck. Chris's neighbour Nate, his CCTV footage picked up Chris leaving that morning, and some say, including myself, you can see a person leaving the house, which is a woman, who I believe to be Kessinger. She followed Chris out to the worksite, Service 319, but before this she made a quick phone call to her good friend Jim, either to confide in him what had just happened or to tell him that the plan had gone wrong and that he was fully aware of Chris and Kessinger's plan in the first place. But either way, she made that phone call outside the Watts house that morning. That is a fact. And by the time Chris and Kessinger had got to the worksite, they had very little time to dig a shallow grave, dispose of the kids' bodies, all before work colleagues turned up. So in the time he had to do it all, it can't have possibly been done alone. There's also evidence from Chris's phone. He didn't walk up and down the oil battery steps. So was this Kessinger that walked up them steps and disposed of Bella and Cece in the oil batteries, and it's Chris that dug and buried Shanann's body? It's my opinion in this theory. I also believe that the bombshell information that Kessinger provided law enforcement was that she was aware of the murders. She knew exactly where they needed to look and struck a deal with law enforcement for her information and involvement in it all. And she simply just broke first, and she threw Chris under the bus, approaching them first and cutting a deal. Remember, this is only a theory, but with this case from day one, things didn't make sense. The official story and interviews with all involved don't add up. It doesn't make sense why a seemingly loving husband and dad would do this, but once Kessinger got her claws into him and planting seeds of doubt and ideas of a life he could have with her, it doesn't make sense that she was present at the Watts house that morning, but yet in interviews it wasn't even asked about. It doesn't make sense that Chris killed his kids if all he wanted to be is to be with Kessinger. It doesn't make sense that the oil site, Chris's data doesn't show him walking up and down the steps. It doesn't make sense that he says if it wasn't for meeting Kessinger or going to the Lazy Dog, his family would still be alive. It doesn't make sense that if Kessinger's friend Jim could provide her with an alibi, that she was adamant to leave him alone and leave him out of the investigation. All I know is that what law enforcement told us and what mainstream media wants us to believe is not what actually happened. and somewhere within these theories and other creators come up with ideas, they'll contain the truth somewhere. I'm Truth Untold. Thank you for watching.